Hi everyone, it's Rena. So this video is if you have your sun in Scorpio as well as your moon in Scorpio. And, needless to say, this combination is quite powerful. If your sun and moon are within a certain degree span called an orb, they will form a conjunction, and that will be even more emotional. So I personally use astro.com. It's a free service to generate charts. And the reason I use that one is that the charts are very clear to read, but they also have an aspects table. And that's very clear to read too. So that does all the work for me. And so you can just see if your sun and moon form a conjunction. But even if they don't, just the fact that they're both in Scorpio will be a big deal, because you will likely be someone that is has a very strong force field. Of course, I could say the rising sign would contribute to that as well. And actually, if your rising sign let's say your rising sign is in Sagittarius, or maybe it's in Gemini, the opposite sign of Sagittarius, you may give off this appearance of being kind of like somebody who is very free-spirited, especially with Gemini rising. It might be that you are a lot lighter than you truly are, because there's like a heavy quality with Scorpio. We use the word intensity all the time with Scorpio to describe the emotions that can really, I was going to say, weigh down somebody who has, more than one placement in their personal planets in Scorpio. And this is not to say, oh, this is terrible or bad, but it is something that is noteworthy for sure. And what can happen is, like, let's say you have Libra rising, or what I said before about those other two signs, you may seem more lighthearted than you are. Maybe your rising sign is Taurus and you seem very chill, very balanced, or Capricorn and you seem very controlled and dry. Capricorn is Earth, so is Taurus. So it may come across as more detached. But then if somebody gets to know you well, they may see a totally different side of you. And they may feel like it was false advertising, because they didn't realize that you were, in fact, super duper emotional. The rising sign is how we present ourselves to others. And this is also how we dress. Somebody wrote to me under one of my videos, and, because I had said about the rising sign and dressing and appearance, and they were saying, oh, it's much more than that. It's not that, like saying that was superficial. Well, I realize that there are other aspects to somebody's rising sign, but the bottom line is that it really isn't who the person is, because even with the body, if this is on the cusp of that first house of the body and the physical self, the body is not the self. And that's like a spiritual concept. But even in terms of this lifetime, a person may be born into a certain body that really is not in alignment with who they really are. I'll give you an example. A woman could be very curvaceous, like Marilyn Monroe. And I thought that Marilyn Monroe had like Gemini moon, like she was a sun in Gemini, but I thought she had Gemini rising, but I think she had Cancer rising. So if she did, she may have seemed a lot more voluptuous and that kind of thing. But she was actually an intellectual. She was a sun in Gemini individual. And yet, she gave off this appearance of being kind of, yeah, a bombshell, but also kind of, I don't want to use the word bimbo, but that kind of an airhead and sexualizing, like a sex object. Albeit in those days, I mean, she passed away in the early 60s, so there wasn't the same kind of, showing of skin the way that there is nowadays, but she certainly was, she's iconic, but in those days she was considered like the hottest sex symbol around, or one of the hottest. So yes, I do think that the rising sign is pretty superficial ultimately, but it still is relevant to talking about in terms of how this all plays out, because I think it will make a difference if you have a double sun, moon, and Scorpio. Your rising sign becomes very important because it can lead people astray or lead you astray in terms of how you behave around other people. And it's not that somebody who is very gregarious and lighthearted and fun-loving is putting on an act if they have this combination. They may really sincerely have that side to themselves, but they, because it's so different than how they really are, it can be very jolting for somebody who is dealing with you, because they feel bamboozled, they feel blindsided. Like, how could you present yourself in such a deceptive way, or like completely different sort of way? I shouldn't say deceptive, because again, you might not be deceiving people. If your rising sign is in like Leo, for instance, which is a fire sign, or even Aries, these are fire signs, but they do, to me, tend to get plagued with ego issues when they are imbalanced. And with Scorpio, there could be hard angles coming from the sun and or moon to the rising sign. And that will exacerbate issues. But, and the reason is that if somebody has, like, for instance, their sun squaring off to the rising sign, how they want to come across may frustrate them, because their rising sign will kind of block their sun and make it hard for them to shine, and it may give people the wrong impression about them. But it's never the wrong impression, because there's always going to be influences regardless. There's always going to be that element that makes the person more one way versus another. And with Scorpio, there's a lot of what I would call repression. That's not necessarily a good word, because repression implies that the person is consciously or unconsciously, keeping things inside. And it's suppression is a better term, because Scorpio knows exactly what they're doing when they are being secretive. There's a reason why you do that, and you do that because you don't want somebody to get the upper hand in a situation. Scorpio, ruled by Mars and Pluto. Pluto in particular can be about power. So power issues can plague you in life. That's why I'm saying with the rising sign with Leo, for instance, that can be even more the issue of power and personal power. By the way, I'm a sun in Sagittarius, so if you want to come at me, if you have Aries rising or Leo rising, and you think that I'm, you're wondering why I didn't mention Sagittarius as having ego issues, it isn't because I'm a sun in Sag, it's because I just feel like those two signs are more difficult when it comes to these kind of issues. Sagittarius is a mutable sign. And I mentioned Sag. If you have Sag as a rising sign, you may be more happy-go-lucky. But it's kind of on the surface because really you do have this profound inner life with the moon in Scorpio in particular that can really make you this totally other person in certain ways. And this is not going to be easy for other people to grasp because they can see one side and they're like, well, why is this happening? But this other side is also prominent. And that can, I mean, it all depends. If you do have water or earth as your ascendant, for instance, you may have more harmony and consistency in how you present yourself and how you really are. And even like a Mars sign in, well, if it's in Scorpio, it's going to really be wild. But there may be, like, if you have Mars in Capricorn, there may be a lot of balance there because it's going to give you some restraint. Because this is one of the important things to grasp, is that the moon is our emotional nature. And so having the moon in Scorpio, I would say arguably is the most difficult moon sign of all to have, because the emotions that are generated typically by Scorpio tend to be difficult. They're shadow emotions. Scorpio rules the 8th house, which is the house of the shadow. It's also other things like transformation and the occult, which means hidden. So hidden knowledge, forbidden knowledge, shamanism, death, sexuality. These are 8th house issues. Anything taboo is 8th house. And the two rulers of Scorpio are Mars and Pluto, and both of them are in Vedic astrology considered malefic planets, meaning that the influence that they generate can be, well, you could say problematic at best. But some of us are not Vedic astrologers. I'm a Western astrologer, and I have criticisms of Vedic astrology, and that's one of them. This idea that something is malefic implies that because it's difficult, that it's bad, and that's not true. Some of the most challenging things in life can help us to transform and make us into something great. Whereas if we're given a lot of things handed on a silver platter, we might not appreciate them. So it really is simplistic to look at life that way. I'm sure there's some good things about Vedic astrology, though, so I don't want to just completely dismiss it. But anyway, so the moon is the emotional nature, but the sun, because it's in a water sign, it will also be emotional. So it's like you can't get away from emotions as really a big theme in your life. And this may or may not be something that you are thrilled about. You may not like that this is so prominent in your personality. You may come from a background of trauma, and the 8th house can also be seen as a house that represents trauma. But depending on what is going on in a person's 8th house, there could be different angles there. The person may be able to transform themselves and transcend trauma. In some cases, they're controlled by that. Even, if the trauma happens when they're young, they still are adversely affected by it as an adult, or, maybe in some cases it's a life and death situation that happens to them even as an adult that completely flips their life upside down. When you have this combination, you might even kind of like be used to a crisis mode where you always have to, you had to respond to all kinds of threats, either to your basic sense of existence or emotionally to keep yourself sane, to keep yourself from going off the deep end, or to keep somebody else sane, or to, try to help somebody else, maybe a family member or what have you. And how this affects adults is when they have, kind of distanced themselves from abuse, if that's how it played out for you, it can be kind of strange because all of a sudden you don't have these threats, but you still have these habitual patterns or these expectations that life is going to be chaotic. And so, it affects people differently, obviously. And looking at it astrologically, I'd have to look at inner planets and house placements to see, how it might play out for somebody. But an example would be the person who starts to micromanage their life. And I notice that this is true for fixed signs in general. So in addition to Scorpio, we're talking about Taurus, Aquarius, and Leo in particular, that they tend to like schedules. So you may be very attached to a certain schedule, like a to-do list, and very, in need of planning ahead a lot, because the person is trying to save themselves from any curveballs, anything that may be unpredictable. And to some degree, this can be actually an adaptation that can be very helpful in life. I mean, to have a schedule, to have like some kind of routine or pattern to do things can make a person very productive and, organized. And yet, if the person is too attached to things going their way at a certain time, that's not how life works. Life is messy sometimes. We can control certain things, but we can't control everything. So sometimes people can become overly controlling of others because of their own need for guarantees and stability. The moon can indicate the mother, and so the mother, you may have a love-hate relationship with your mother in some cases, because if she was scorpionic, it could be those dark qualities. I always say that the moon can represent the shadow aspects of a particular sign. And we could almost make a joke about Scorpio and saying, okay, what are the non-shadow aspects of Scorpio? Because it, it specializes in the shadow. But yeah, the qualities such as envy or jealousy, competitiveness, which I think that comes from the Mars part of the rulership. This, need to merge with another person. This could be true of you as well. And you have to really kind of, chill with intensity towards other people in relationships, because you might imitate this behavior too, where you just want to like merge with another person, even like a platonic friend. You may be like wanting such a close relationship that it's very stifling to the other person. So realizing that your emotional needs may not be somebody else's is key, because you tend to be body, mind, and soul. with another person. That's what you want. And that makes you a rather extreme personality where you're very into someone or something, or you're almost like indifferent to them. Or like some kind of, like, if you like a TV show, you might be obsessed with it. Or you just could not care less. So the mother may have, if it's like with her daughter, she may have been competitive with her daughter. If she didn't have a man, she may have been envious of her daughter as her daughter went through adolescence. And there could be some weird thing with sex, and like either shaming the daughter about sex because she has issues surrounding it, or who knows, like trying to sleep with her daughter's boyfriend. I mean, it can run the gamut with craziness. And if she has a son, if you're a man whose mother may have been smothering to you, I'm saying if you're a double Scorpio and you're a man, she may have tried to make you almost like her substitute husband. And I'm not saying, straight up incest. I'm talking about emotional incest, where the boy is her confidant and she's being inappropriate emotionally with her son. And that can affect his relationships as an adult. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of psychodrama with this double Scorpio stuff going on. But you are really a natural psychologist for sure. And speaking of that, this may be a field that intrigues you, that you may think to go into. But I will tell you, because I forgot, there was something about Scorpio or something about psychology. If you actually pursue it, you may find yourself disappointed because it doesn't, it's not what you're hoping it would be. And I'm saying that just from personal experience as somebody who has the moon in conjunction with Pluto. So it is kind of like a scorpionic influence, and the sun in the 8th house, and taking Psychology 101, thinking it's going to be a certain thing. And it turns out that it wasn't. And it was a very strange type of feeling because it almost seemed very scientific, but not very intuitive. And I think that psychology always has to be intuitive and really emotions based, not in the mind. That's to me, being a therapist and being too much in the mind can, create a disconnect between the therapist and the patient. But anyway, I digress. So, in terms of professions, I just touched upon psychology. But, again, with the 8th house being Scorpio's domain, the occult, I mentioned the occult, and that can include even astrology and the tarot, but also, to me, anything metaphysical is the occult, because it's, knowledge that is more secret, that is more hidden, that is not like mainstream. And shamanism is a practice that is like personal alchemy. I find that very intriguing, although in my personal feeling, I think some people will gravitate towards it more than others. But this is about magic and, of course, paganism. Yeah, how could I forget about that? So you may find yourself through some of these kinds of practices, and that may even lead to becoming a healer of some sort or a channeler. I can't believe I didn't mention this, but I this combination would be highly psychic. Very perceptive just in terms of understanding human nature through psychology, but also very psychic because it's double water. The eighth house that Scorpio rules is about other people's money. I think all the water signs are very intuitive about money and may be good at managing money. And if other factors indicate, you might be good as an investment banker or other type of person who deals, maybe a stockbroker or something along those lines. Of course, an artist, and water signs, can be about creativity as well. And in terms of love, this combination, do look at your Venus. What is your Venus in? Is your Venus in Sag? What if your Venus is in Sagittarius and you have Gemini rising? You may run away from relationships. And even though you want them more than anything else, you're afraid of getting close. Definitely there are trust issues with this sun-moon combination. And that can stem from past trauma. But the thing that you also have to look at is your Venus and Mars and your ascendant, because you could be giving off certain messages with your rising sign, and your Venus and Mars can indicate attitudes and behaviors that can either, make love more likely or make you shy away from it. Because Scorpio is adjacent to the sign of Libra, you might have these inner planets, some of that in Libra, and that could influence you as well about wanting a partner, because Libra rules the seventh house of partnership. I feel that you can be a very devoted partner when you get your head on straight. If you have these opposing influences that kind of make you feel pulled in different directions, and you really are conscious about this, then I feel like you might be able to kind of transcend some of the more difficult aspects of it. But ultimately, you will have to be the kind of person who is fearless in love, not trying to control things. Because if a Scorpio person, or especially a double Scorpio person, is secretive about their emotional self because they're afraid of not just about your current emotions, but maybe about what you feel vulnerable about, scared about, and you can't open up to someone that you are dating, for instance, because you're afraid that they're going to use that information against you in some way. They're going to throw it back in your face. They're going to tell other people, and you're just afraid of something like that, then you will probably have a relationship that will never really be that deep. And this is exactly what you're looking for. You're looking for that person that you can be completely yourself with. But because the prospect of being abandoned or being cheated on is so scary to you, it can sometimes be easier to be more detached, or pretending to be. You're definitely not going to be more detached, but you might pretend to be, especially if you have assistance with some inner planets or the ascendant. And then, if you do attract a relationship, it probably won't be what you want it to be. So learning how to risk everything for love, but of course with the right person, can be very helpful in being able to get your needs met. And it can, if you do find that special someone, it might be a a lifetime relationship. One thing to probably work on is forgiveness, because I think Scorpio is one of the top signs that struggles with forgiveness. Maybe being a fixed sign, but also being a water sign and having your emotions front and center. But because you're a fixed sign, they can kind of become very hardened or fossilized, and it becomes difficult for you to move forward. And also, again, that feeling of power that I associate particularly with Pluto, one of your rulers, where you feel that sense of empowerment, or you think you feel it because you are not forgiving someone, because you are holding something against someone and, being angry at them. You may think that by softening that you are weakening, and that's not true. And I'm not going to go into the idea of what really forgiveness is about, but it's not what a lot of people think it is. And doesn't mean that you are associating with the person who you feel did you wrong. Ultimately, it's seeing everybody as a child of God who is trying to do the best that they can, even when they fail miserably. That they are only capable of doing what, as much as self-love as they have. When people hate themselves, what are the chances that they're going to treat other people with respect? It's going to be slim to none. So, yeah, I mean, it's getting past the need to condemn. And that's another thing too. There may be this theme in your life of feeling vengeful, feeling what's the other word besides vengeful? Like the whole eye for an eye thing. And this is, I was just going to say, like, if you have Mars and Libra, that could exacerbate it, or Mars and Scorpio. But Libra believes in fairness, and that can be like, if that's the thing, it can drive you bonkers to see somebody getting away with something. And it might not just be towards you, it might be towards somebody that you care about. But the thing is that if we can see that everything is in divine order, and if we don't need to mete out punishment like an Old Testament God, that we can really want for other people that they have enlightenment, not that they suffer. Suffering, it may bring a person closer to the truth, but ultimately, people arrive at the truth through clarity of thought. And so anyway, I think that this is a very powerful combination. And I think that if you, use your power wisely and not abuse it, because, it's a very important thing is that this combination, if misused, could be the person who is very capable of manipulating others. And they can do this for a number of reasons. They could do it as a salesperson who's trying to get sales. Or, this could be somebody in relationships who's trying to keep someone there. And they can spot the weaknesses, the psychological weaknesses in other people very easily and use it against them. So it's like, to much who is given, much is expected. Do not abuse your powers, because it's, you don't want that karmic blowback. You don't want to have the cause and effect come back on you because you did something underhanded, because you wanted to maintain the upper hand in a relationship, where you wanted to get that sale and you knew exactly how to manipulate someone. Okay, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.